Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. So today is Sunday the 18th of April and today we are fitting a front door. So I'm going to show you what I do to take out an existing, which I'll quickly show you, is here. This is an old aperture which was fitted many years ago, and you can see on the bottom here they tried to make up the threshold out of concrete, still here, but instead of trying to take all that lot out and building it back up with the current frame that we've got about 35mm to make up. So from the head to the bottom of the sill we've got 2.65 meters, and I've already measured the existing from the concrete to the top and it's 2.1. So obviously you want a little bit of playing room for shooting stuff in. So what I'm going to use is just a bit of 4x4 tannalized post, and once I've cut it down the size I'll put a little bit of DPM on the bottom and even cut in the groove for that, which is sort of like a secondary drip, so if any water does come underneath one side of this side, so if you can imagine, probably can't see it because of the light, but there'll be a groove cut into that, and if you can imagine water trying to track back, it will hit that bit of metal and then it can't go anywhere. And if there's any moisture coming up from the concrete trying to leach up through, the DPM will stop that as well and it will let it come back out, which is what we want to do. And then the same on the sides. We need to pack out the sides by 25mm, but you need to allow for if the brickwork isn't quite right. So what I'm going to do is use this piece of oak, which I've had left over from another job, and just go from the bottom of the sill, or the top of the sill, sorry, to the underside of the top of the head, and then we'll put a trim around it so you'll never ever see it once it's all done. So guys, what I'm doing now is I'm just trying to take out the old frame, and sometimes the easiest way possible is just to start off using the skill saw, battery operated one. I've got a little Makita brushless one here, and just go as deep as you possibly can without hitting the brickwork, and then try and finish it off a handsaw and tap a section out, and it'll give you a lot more maneuverability to pull the frame out. Right guys, in this section of the video I've just done a little time lapse just so you can see what I'm doing. I'm literally just taking out a section of the timber, so then it's easy for me to pry the frame off, ready to get the other side off, take the door off and whatnot, and then take the frame out and get ready to put a new one in. Really nice hardwood to work with. Sometimes they got to come out to put the new stuff in. So guys, now you can see I got one side of the jam out. Now it's just a matter of taking the door off this side. Now when it's an old door like this, it's all beaten up. There's no point in putting a shim underneath just to hold it in position, but generally you start from the bottom and you work your way up. If you work your way up the top, it will just fall out, and you don't want that, a door landing on your head. So guys, I'll just show you the aperture now, the Brickwork Aperture, just up here. So now you've got everything out, it's best to come along with your level just to make sure how far out it's out of plumb and square. So now guys, now the frame's all out, so I'll get rid of all that dust, but now I'm going to make the new or packing sort of seal to go over the top of this, and I'll cut a groove in that out of this piece of tannalised timber, and then it will pack it out to the right height to meet with the top, and then there will only be a little trim to get over all these uneven bits of brickwork. Right guys, I thought I had some pretty decent looking chisels, but just take a look at this. That is just ridiculous.
A beast.
Can you hold that back for me?
Yeah.
Just look at it. Do you mind if I cut the locks out with that, Jules?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Just look at that. It's just ridiculous.
Firmer chisel.
I've never seen chisels like that before. Is it sharp though?
Pretty.
Oh yeah, pretty sharp. Yeah. Thanks for showing me that. Just a little tip for you guys: when you're trying to cut something square, if you're a little bit wonky when you're using your skill saw, if you've got either a speed square, roofing square, combi square, doesn't matter, and the blade's quite thick, you can just sit your square on there, and then you can use your circular saw, set at the right gauge from that square line back to the blade, and it will cut it nice and square for you. Just a little tip for you guys. All right. So guys, what I'm doing now, I'm just setting the height of the blade on the table saw down to the height of that little bit of steel which is bedded into that concrete I showed you earlier, and then just setting the guide up to where it starts, and then just trench it out, keep trenching all the way through until you get to the desired width. In this case, because the little metal threshold in there is kind of on the skew a little bit, I've got to take out a lot more than what's needed just to accommodate, just for moving it sideways and left and right, just to get it perfect in there. But I'll show you that once I'm done. There you go guys, you can see what I've created now. It's just a trench going all the way through, and I'll show you what it's going to look like when it fits in there. Just clean that out a little bit. I'll give it a good hoover out in a minute. Nice and happy. So it's just a little bit too tight. all good. So that's what I meant, guys, about the packer. And you see on the bottom, once the damp goes underneath there as well, no water wherever come leach out from this. If it ever does get really wet and then the concrete starts leaching up through, the damp will stop that from rotting this out. So guys, what I've done now is that I have marked out where the concrete comes to, so on the sides where you can get a decent fixing in, and then I'll just go along, plug and screw those using my Makita SDS with a 7mm bit in it. Takes a brown plug, and yeah, then I'll get that fixed down and I can start assembling the jambs on the framework, that's the head. Those are the two jambs on the side, left and right, and then the seal is just behind that bit of balustrade in there. So now guys, I'm starting to cut the horns of the side of the jamb and the seal, and you can either gauge it line with a pencil, or you can just follow the edge of the frame and the seal. And the best way to do it is so you can see I'm pinching with my thumb against the blade, just gently, almost like you're squeezing the tube of toothpaste or something like that. And just gently use the handsaw and try to use all the blade. Don't try and jiggle it like this, try and use the whole blade. And when you start getting towards the end, you can just hold on to the piece that you're cutting, so then you don't get tear outs where if it was, say, out here somewhere, it will tend to want to drop and then it will tear out one of the faces, and you don't want that, obviously. You don't want to be making the job harder for yourself. Alright guys, just like that. Now, let's see if it's square. Pretty good. I'll show you that now. So here's my combi square, set 90 degrees, and look at that guys, you can't beat that. And then on top, and you see it's setting down there absolutely perfect, which is what you want. So guys, you've seen that I've cut the tails or the horns off the ends of the seals and the jambs at the top, and now we're just going ahead and fixing it all in position at the moment. So the first thing I did is to make sure to come down, I don't know, I normally come down about 4 to 5 inches, something like that, but make sure every fixing goes into the center of the brick. Don't try and put it into the mortar, because 9 times out of 10 it will just push it way out. As if you can imagine the wall plugs like this, and as the screw goes into it, it opens up like that, and that's what creates the pull to pull everything back in position. So, and then the next thing I did is to come up from the seal. Generally locks are about 900 to a metre up, but in this case, because there's only one lock going on here, we might end up putting up here somewhere. So the last thing I wanted to do is not to put a fixing where the latch is going, because otherwise it's just a nightmare, and then you have to trench further into the frame, and it just, you don't really get a good enough fixing. There's not enough bite there, and you end up only having about that much for the screw to go into. Once it's countersunk, it finishes there and it's just going to do nothing, and it will just pull out. So it's the same principle from this side to that side, and I've just made sure that it's all parallel, and then I've gone along with a level to make sure it's all level. Sorry about that guys, my battery ran out on my camera. So like I was saying in the last part of the video, was you mark down where your hinges are going to come, and generally speaking it's 150 down to the top, and then however big your hinge is, and then you come up 225 from the bottom to the bottom of the hinge, and then you go centre, and once you marked out the top you come to the centre of that one, then you move up or down depending on what you want to do, but I tend to work from the top, so then you know, point of reference, where you're going to go on every single time. So yep, and then you make sure that when you put your fixings in, you can hide them behind the hinge if you want, but like I said previously, once you start trenching out, you don't actually end up with that much more meat there. So that's why I try and either go to the top and work my way from there, and just make sure you get in the middle of the brick every single time. Okay. So guys, now that I'm happy with the position and now it's all wedged up, the brickwork is quite far out, and because I've got such a big void there now, and I couldn't really pack it out with square shims because it does this all over the place. The best way I find is just to secure it fully in position is just use some foam filler, and when you do use it, make sure you turn the nozzle and the can upside down when you do it, and I work my way from the bottom to the top. Good solid fixing, but then also it stops things like water and all that sort of stuff, and then it gives you something else to feel against if the customer just wanted to use some flexible silicone or mastic, or even just putting a trim around it. It just covers it all, and it stops any draft and all that sort of stuff coming through. So now guys, it's just a matter of waiting until all this foam goes off, and you got to be a little bit careful with this stuff because you only have to squirt it a little bit and it just expands and expands and expands, and if you're not careful it will just seep out everywhere, almost like here. But I just wanted to try and seal that sort of 8mm gap that was up there. So once I'm happy with it, expanded out, you just cut it all off, and then you can either put a trim up around there, or you can just fill it with some mastic, but that's all depending up to the customer really, what they want to do. Alright, I'll let this stuff go off, and then I will start marking out the hinges and show you how I do them. So guys, you can see now I'm just starting to set out for the hinges, and the way that I do them is, so from the bottom it's 225mm to the underside, then you sit your hinge on there like that, and then what I do is that you gauge the bottom in with a Stanley knife, and then what I'd like to do is just close over your score line, and then when you mark your score line on the top, and then when the hinge goes in there, it's a nice tight fit. And then also between the knuckle here and the ball bearing part of the hinge, you bring it out ever so slightly, so then the knuckle doesn't rub on the internal face of your frame, because then what you tend to get is black staining down there, so you want to try and avoid that as much as possible. I'll just show you the top hinge, which I've already marked out and chopped in, so I'll show you how tight they go once they're marked in. There you go. Now it's in there, it's a nice tight fit. I've fitted the frame and I've chopped out all the hinges, as you can see. The next step was to lift the door in position, and I've cut the bottom of the door to allow for it to come over this threshold there. As you can see, it's just a water drip. The next step was to lift the door into position and sit it in there and push it up tight with wedges up against where the hinges are going, and then you just trace them across. So you can either do the top or the bottom, but I like to do the tops, and then I mark a little cross on the bottom of the line, so I know which indication that I've done, and I'll show you. So you can see that little pencil line there, that indicates the top of the hinge, and then that bit there represents where I need to mark down. All right, and then the hinge will go in this side, all right, all the way down. And I'll sit it in my shooting blocks and I'll show you what I do next. So guys, now I'm just using these wedges and tapping it into the shooting blocks that I've got there, and it just pinches it into position, so when I'm marking out the hinges it doesn't wobble everywhere. All right, I'll just show you what that looks like. All right, there's the shooting block. It's just a piece of tannalized bit of timber, and I just cut it at like a, I think it's like a 5-degree cut here, and made a wedge, folding wedge to go in there. And you keep one edge square, which represents the face of the door, and you have one angled so you can get a wedge in there. So now, all I have to do now is trace where I've marked up the hinges. As you can see, that little pencil line there, that represents the top knuckle of the hinge, and you can see the little X just down there, that represents the other half of the hinge. All right, and so I'll take that off in a minute, but and then the same in the middle, and then the same at the top. So then when you come to lift the door into position, it will sit nicely within that. You can use a hinge jig if you want, like the trend one, but I don't like doing that because you have to pin in there and you have to fill it over with a wax filler, which is more time consuming. You just want to get the job done and move on to the next one. Okay, and this is the rebate which I took out for the threshold at the bottom where the seal is on the bottom, which I've already showed you. All right, so now the next step is done now. So what I've done, I marked those with my knife. It's just exactly the same way you used on the frame, and then I've gauged, you probably can't see it on the camera, but there's a tiny little gauge line there. And the reason why I haven't chopped those in is because I want a really crisp, clean edge, and the way I'm going to do that is by using my trimming router, which I'll show you. This little one, and it's even got a depth stop on there, and it's got a gauge line setting bit on there. So what you can do, you can just set it on there like that, and the stop on the side, that T-shape bit which is mounted to the router, will stop you from going all the way through, and then you can just follow it up to the top, stop within 2-3 mil of there, and then you can just finish it off with a chisel, and it looks nice and crisp. In this part of the video, what I'm doing, I'm just using my palm router, set at the right height for the hinge, and using the gauge stop which pushes against the face of the door, just taking out all the hinges, and then I'll finish them off with a chisel, and then we'll get on to swinging the door. So guys, now you can see, look, from doing the method that I just showed you, you end up with a lovely, nice, neat finish. And when it comes to putting the hinges on, you put the knuckle, which doesn't go all the way back on the ball bearing, on the door, so it gives you the space between the door and the bearing all through here, so when the door's doing this all the time, it doesn't rub and then cause that black staining like I said earlier. I'll show you all the hinges that are in there. There's the other one, and there's the other one there. So now what I've got to do is, because the door fitted in there absolutely perfectly, I had a nice 2 mil margin, 3 mil margin at the top, and then it was sat tight on the floor. So what I've got to allow now is just for like a 3 mil plane off down this side, just so it's lovely and parallel all the way around the frame. Next is that I take out the lock. In this case it's a 5-lever deadlock. You sit it on there like that, and this position is going to be dead center of the door. But what you got to watch out for with the key on there, it will not be center, it is offset to allow for when the key turns, it pushes the deadbolt out. So what I've marked on there is the center line, and then I've measured the width between this shoulder and that shoulder, and then I've come across there to the center, which is 60mm, and the width of this is 80. So I've come from the center line and just marked a tiny little line, a very faint line, which is 40mm, half of 80, and then I've come 60mm down to this line, which then represents where all the escutcheon's going to go. Okay guys, and then you get the faceplate out, which is this, but this one's not going on, it's going to be a black one, and that represents the center. Okay, and then you measure to the top and to the bottom. In this case this one's 138mm by 25mm wide, and this door is 44mm thick. So obviously to come center it's 22, and then it's 12.5mm both sides. But instead of just following the pencil lines, what I'm going to do is use the same trick that I used with my router and cutting out the hinges. But what you do, you plunge the router into the door. The last thing you want to do is come across with the cutter and then obviously take that all out. You don't want that, okay? And then the next step is to get your depth, okay? To set your router to that, right, which is between the face here and the back of the faceplate, which is this bit up here, and that will trench it out to the right depth, absolutely perfect. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is just to score those little bits out there ever so slightly, even come perhaps even a mil back with my chisel or my knife, and the same on those pencil lines there, so we don't get any tear out when the blade starts cutting through it. And once that's all done, then we mark out the center again all the way up through, then mark out where the two shoulders go, which is obviously 80mm, which then you can follow from the center, 40mm back, 40mm this way, and then you can go down through with your spade bit. Right now guys, now I've chopped all this lot out and it fits nice and snug. Just like I said in the previous section, was like between the center and the top, which was 40mm, but in this case just give it a tiny little bit more just so it fits in there nice and snug, and you don't chop out all this lot here because that's where you're going to be fixing the face screws too. So these are just some little engineered screws on the face, which is just going to help bind this face plate with the latch down there. Alright, okay, and once this is all fitted, I'll show you with all the escutcheon and all that sort of stuff on. Alright guys, well that is it. That is the finished door in position. The letter plate I couldn't film, it was just getting a little bit later on in the day, and I had to get home. I've got a wife and 2 kids, so I was eager to get home at that point, but you can see that the lock just fitted absolutely beautifully, and the gaps all the way around the door were beautifully in parallel, which is exactly what you wanted. So the only thing left to do on the door was the letterbox at the bottom, but the customer's got to cut the bolts, so he wanted to do all that sort of stuff. And then there's a draft seal to go in, but they wanted to keep those off so they can keep them brown. But that is it, and what a good job that was. And I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I know it was a very, very long tutorial, but I just wanted to do a full in-depth tutorial about how to swing a door. And if you do like this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.